I know there was actually Ethan, come back for a second. He was when you're talking about dimensions, he asked me this question in the car, and then we're just talking about this right now. Do you remember the question you asked? Because this is a really good question. It was good
Oh,
timing that
it
he walked
was
back
it
in the
was
room.
the difference between realities, worlds, um, and dimensions. I think that was the question.
Mm-hmm.
Is like how to
Yeah,
differentiate between all three because they kind of get used like synonymously.
Yep.
right.
Yep.
So that was my question there.
Realities,
Yeah,
worlds, and dimensions.
yeah.
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 Yeah,
So that's a good
that's
question.
a really good question because it is. You're absolutely right.
Bring it up
Because
for all of us to
yeah, I was
give
like,
our
digest this
perspective.
one.
I know. I
Excavate,
was like,
excavate,
I
excavate.
know my kids will ask me questions in the car, like April, when you were speaking before about, how you wanted to go on that journey to save your kids. I very much did the same thing. I wanted to go on my healing journey to save my kids from that. And then having to realize that they have their own things that they're going to have to go through. And I
Mhm.
don't necessarily need to save them from that. But what I am there to do is to give them the tools. As I learn the tools how to with my own healing, I can pass those on to them, which is I'm sure what you're doing as well, right? And that's what you do is you give them the tools and then hope that they can use them too to help
Yeah.
themselves. So I'm always in the car with my kids and I get questions like that, and I'm like, I'm not prepared for that right,
Where was this?
right,
Was
right
this
this
today
second.
when
Now
you guys?
today when we went out to get
I
paint,
wasn't
yeah,
there. I'm like, oh,
I know, and I
that's
was
a
like,
great
this is a
question.
Kelly question. I don't
It is a Kelly question. It
know.
is.
Yeah, so we'll have
I
to
yeah, I have a daughter who asks questions. She hasn't asked that one, but she does ask some questions, and I stop and I'm like, I never would have thought. Like she said something one time, and she said, "It's hard managing other people's energies," and it just kind of was like,
Mm,
"What?" And I said, "Well, you don't have to manage other people's energies, but it was just a perspective." So she does that for me too. Um, so the world, the realities, and then the dimensions. So are, I mean, this is a Kelly's question, but the world, um, that would be where would you separate the world and the realities from the societal conditioning? Because dimensions completely different.
Well,
But
we have
the
our
world is the
personal world.
culture.
We have our personal world, our individual world, and
Oh,
then
our
we
personal
have the
world.
societal world and the cultural world,
mm,
right?
Mhm.
So our society would be, for us, it'd be Canadian. Culturally, it would be, that sort of like background of where our parents come from,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then our
agree.
reality has to do with our belief structures, and the dimensions have to do with the energies that we are choosing to interact with or not interact with. And there are so many levels of interplay in just
Yeah.
those concepts themselves.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, because I'm thinking, just religion alone,
Oh yeah.
and
mhm,
then
Yep.
your culture, and then your parents, and then your world. And it means one thing to live in America and another to live in South America. But I can say that if you're on this journey and you're open to energy and you're open to the learning,
mhm.
um, you know, the dimensions, that part of it, it's possible because you alter your world, your culture, and your reality, or
Yep.
you're open to altering it. You're open to it. I think for many of us, well, I know it's true for you guys, but it was for me. The things I was being taught as a little child in church just purely didn't make sense.
Yeah, as
And
when I
that
was
this
a kid
a
and
little kid,
when I was
I
little, I'd sit there and go, "What? That what? Why? Okay."
The first time I ever
Yeah.
got handed a Bible, I was like, I looked through it, I was all excited. I went, this is, and I kind of like
Yeah.
Kelly's experience. I was like, this isn't the right book.
Yeah.
And I'm like 5. I'm like, how
Yeah,
do I?
yeah. I remember getting I think when I was baptized because my sister I think we were all with the 3 of us might have been baptized at the same time when my youngest sister was a baby,
Okay.
but I know I was about 5 or 6 and my other sister was 3. So I know the 2 of us got baptized at the same time because I was older. And I was given a little white Bible, and I remember looking at it going, "That's not the right book." And then it wasn't until years later that I think it was a Pistis Sophia book maybe,
Oh, yeah,
that I
okay.
saw it and I was like, "Oh, that's the book,"
Right.
that I was
Yeah.
like,
I
but I
remember
was
I
like,
remember it was like I had one of those picture Bibles,
"Oh, okay.
right? Those like the big
Yeah."
huge graphic novel with all the pictures, and I was like, wow, that's a cool story, but it's the wrong story. I'm like,
Wrong story.
it's the wrong book.
My daughter had one
Yeah.
and liked to read it because there's hot Jesus in there, because it was a
Yeah.
picture one. She's like, "I liked hot Jesus."
Yeah. And I think that the reality is shifting. So, when I was a child, it was very Christian, and my family, um, while it's not like complete, they weren't strict, but they were Baptists. So, and my grandmother, before she passed, took me to church with her, and you know, so I knew that religion very well. It never made sense to me, but um, I I listened to this series from Deepak Chopra
Mm,
that was about how to know God, and in there he talked about how the concept of God has morphed over
Mhm.
time, and
Oh,
I'm finding with the current energy and the current children, it's morphing again.
yep.
mm.
Because I've actually had like my granddaughter and my daughter, they're both teenagers, say to me, I have a really hard time believing there's an old white man with a beard in the sky. And
Yeah,
that's a reality, right?
Yes.
That's a
Mhm,
and
reality. And
mhm.
that's sort of like something. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's like the cultural dimension
right.
of the historical world that the Bible comes from,
Yeah.
right? So going back to like the realities and the worlds and the dimensions, you have all these cultural worlds with their historical, with their history, that is a dimension of, a personal perceptual reality that then gets imposed and then generalized and spread out. And yeah, it's one of the things that I've noticed too in a lot of, just watching social media, is how people are talking about, spirituality or God, or like lately there's been a slew of influencers who suddenly found Jesus and are like, everything but Jesus is satanic, and we're going, wow, I've never, like, this isn't like we're like in the 1500s again. Wow, holy
Yeah.
smokes! It's like,
Right.
what's going
Not
on?
supposed to go back that
And people are so desperate to find something that they can prop their reality up with,
Yeah.
that's outside of them. Like, they're so desperate to give their power away that when something doesn't work and people get so emotionally invested in that reality
Mm,
and then it implodes, they will go and find another dimension of the same type of energy to attach themselves to,
Hmm.
you know?
mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's I think a lot of it, right? Is the attachment.
Yep,
What do we have our attachments
yep.
to? Are we willing to let go of those beliefs and
Right.
just be open to not know? Well, you have
To
to be
just,
open to not knowing, right? I mean, sometimes you're not going to know the answers, that whatever answers you're looking for are going to come when when you need them, or you're going to heal things when they're brought up. Also can't force your own healing
yep.
either. So,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, I mean, one of the things that I find fascinating about social media, and I follow a couple people who um post stuff about alternative history, but never give any context, never give any explanation. They're just like, question everything, and it's just like there's no context,
or where they got their
or where
information
they
from
got
in
the
the first
information
place.
from in the first place, right?
Yeah,
And it's
which
just
Yeah.
is
like, this is the blind leading the blind here,
yeah, because it's interesting, but it's also like,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, there was
Well,
a
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I remember when my daughter first said that, and because of my background, even though I'm on this journey, but because of my back, when she first said it, my heart kind of sank. I was kind of like, oh, right. And then I had to catch myself and say, what are you doing? That's a belief system. And I had to contemplate, you know, well, she's she's right. it's not necessarily this old bearded man up in the sky that's going to judge you. Um, and I think like you said, it's being willing to be open to that concept and to accept there's a new dimension, there's a new reality, and that's okay.
Yep.
Um, but I also think it's part of the shifting that's happening where people are, we're moving more towards what is actually truth than all of these dogmas and beliefs. So, um, I think it's a good thing. I think that it's probably a shock for a lot of people, all these changes, and they're very quick. It's
Mhm.
happening very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think, like, when I really sat down and looked at what she was saying and looked at, my belief system and then the energy of it all, I was like, yeah, this is, but then again, we have those certain people out there who are, if it's not God, then it's the devil,
Yep. Yep.
right? Um, but I think just being willing to be open and to learn and to grow, that's the biggest thing. Um, Even with lessons that resurface, being open and being willing to, I think the biggest thing is, like when traumas resurface or lessons resurface or whatever it is you want to call it, that I give it this space of allowance.
Hmm.
I
Yep.
acknowledge it and I give it this space of allowance. And I know that I don't know how it's going to work itself out or how it's going to, weave its magic, but I let it do that and I be with it. Um, I don't force it, like you said. Now, I do put out some intentions like, okay, for me, things need to be logical. I'm very logical and I like things to be logical and I like things to make sense. And if I'm going to teach it to somebody else, I want to be able to make it make sense,
Yep.
right? Uh,
Yep.
so I've been saying, okay, you guys need to give me a better understanding of these dimensions.
Mhm.
So I do put out an intention, for example, and I get an answer. So sometimes the learning is self-imposed.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you absentmindedly go like, "Well, what does that mean? Blah blah blah," and then like the next 3 days is like a
Yeah.
download and educational workshop. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, hold on. It's like, can we pause? Can we slow this down? Can we like, what?
Yeah.
Hello?
Right,
Well,
right.
and